I, Mayor Sophia Aragon, am calling the special meeting of the Burien City Council to order on January 30th, 2023. The time is 6:30 p.m. This hybrid meeting is being conducted in person at Burien City Hall and virtually via Zoom webinar. Do we have quorum? I can't see. Okay. Clerk, please call the roll.
Mayor Sophia Aragon,
Present.
Deputy Mayor Kevin Schilling,
Present.
Councilmember Hugo Garcia, Councilmember Jimmy Mata, Councilmember Sydney Moore,
Present.
Councilmember Sarah Moore,
Present.
Councilmember Stephanie Mora.
Present.
Madam Mayor, 2 are absent.
Okay, thank you. And may I have a motion to excuse council members Mata and Garcia?
I move to excuse them.
Second.
Second. All of those in favor, please raise your hand or say aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion passes unanimously. The council will now recess to executive session to discuss litigation risk per RCW 4230-110 sub I, sub 2I, and sub 3I of a proposed or current practice that, if discussed in public, is likely to reverse in a legal or financial consequence to the agency. At approximately 6:50 p.m., the executive session will adjourn and the council will reconvene its regular meeting at 7 p.m. Thank you. 7:10 PM. Thank you.
Sorry, can you say that again? It was muted.
Sure. Executive session will be extended and the council will reconvene at 7:10 PM.
Sure you push this button.
Yeah.
And
So
it will
you're-
go
So I, Mayor Sophia Aragon, I'm calling the regular. Where's that? Okay. I'm calling the regular meeting of the Burien City Council to order on January 30th, 2023, and the time is 7:14 p.m. This hybrid meeting is being conducted in person at Burien City Hall and virtually via Zoom webinar. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Thank you, everyone. And now may I ask, is Councilmember Garcia still not with us? Okay, and I'd like to ask Councilmember Sydney Moore to please give the native land and people's acknowledgement.
We begin by honoring and acknowledging that this meeting is taking place on the ancestral lands and waters of the many Coast Salish tribal peoples who have, since time immemorial, protected and been in relationship with the Salish Sea and these precious lands we know as Burien and our home. As a government agency that is occupying Indigenous lands, it is important that we remember the history of our area and to work towards fixing the injustices that persist. We acknowledge our region's tribal citizens, their descendants, and their ancestors, and we honor their invaluable contributions to this region's community's identity, economy, history, culture, and future.
Okay, thank you. So the clerk will announce interpretation instructions and then take the roll.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The city offers Zoom interpretation. Here you'll find instructions to do so on your computer. And on the next slide are instructions to do so on your mobile device. And with that, we'll go into roll call. Mayor Sophia Aragon,
Present.
Deputy Mayor Kevin Schilling,
Present.
Councilmember Hugo Garcia, Councilmember Jimmy Mata,
Present.
Councilmember Sydney Moore,
Present.
Councilmember Sarah Moore,
Present.
and Councilmember Stephanie Mora.
Present.
Madam Mayor, one is absent.
Okay, and I'd like a motion to excuse Councilmember Garcia.
A motion to excuse.
Okay, so
Second.
it's been moved and seconded to excuse Councilmember Garcia. All those in favor, please raise your hand or say aye. Okay, and the motion passes unanimously. Okay, thank you. So before we move on, as a reminder, each council member has 5 minutes for each comment and question on a topic and may ask a second round of comments if all council members have had the chance to speak. To the extent not otherwise stated in our rules of order, the procedure for council discussion will be consistent with Robert's Rules of Order, 12th edition. So may I have a motion for agenda confirmation?
I move to confirm the agenda.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please raise your hand.
Madam Mayor?
Yes, Councilmember Sydney Moore.
I had an ask. I would move to amend our agenda to remove item C from our business agenda.
Okay,
We have an error in the agenda bill and pursuant to our requirements to meet our public notice and give fair notice to our community on these issues, I would ask that we remove this and add it to a future agenda at a later date when we can publish an accurate agenda description.
okay. Councilmember Mata, you had a question?
I just second that amendment.
Second. What Councilmember Sydney Moore had
That's
stated?
correct.
Okay, so I think to do this properly, there's a motion on the table right now from Deputy Mayor Schilling to confirm the agenda as stated. So to do something different, we'll need to vote it down. So let's do that first. It's on the table.
Point of
Okay.
order, Madam Mayor. I'm moving to amend the motion as it stands. So my motion would be an amendment that would need to be voted on. And then whatever way that goes, then we would vote on the main motion.
Actually, the motion is to confirm the agenda as is. So to amend it, to change that, it's the process, Councilmember Moore. Seriously, it'll help. Okay. So all those in favor of confirming agenda, please say aye or raise your hand. So that would be Deputy Mayor Schilling and Councilmember Mora. All those opposed, please raise your hand. Councilmember Sidney Moore, myself, Councilmember Mata, and Councilmember Sarah Moore. So the motion to confirm the agenda as written has been defeated. So is there another motion on the table about the agenda? Councilmember Moore.
Thank you. I move to approve the agenda minus item C on the business agenda.
Okay, and item C is adoption of ordinance number 811, amending BMC 5.63.070 sub 1. And
Correct.
there's other additional language. Is there a second? Councilmember Mata?
I'll second the motion.
Okay, so it's been motioned and seconded to amend the agenda to remove item C. So all of those in favor, please raise your hand.
Mayor, I have a question for the staff really quick. Adolfo, what was announced as the agenda item in our publish of the agenda?
The agenda includes the Burien Municipal Code as listed on item C. I think the challenge or the error that has been raised is an item that's on the agenda bill itself in the summary that is explaining the issue to council. And in that error, we incorrectly cited the item that's being reviewed as the Burien Municipal Code as opposed to the RCW, Revised Code of Washington. So even though we did share an update with council earlier this week to say this is the error and apologize for the error, the agenda could not have been amended by that point.
Mhm.
And so anyone that reviewed the agenda bill for this particular item saw BMC followed by the code as opposed to RCW followed by the code and may have been confused by that point.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, so again, motion on the table to adopt the agenda as amended to remove item C. So all of those in favor, please raise your hand. So it's Councilmember Sidney Moore, Deputy Mayor Schilling, myself, Councilmember Mata, Councilmember Sarah Moore. All those opposed, please raise your hand. There is one opposed. So the motion passes 5 votes to 1. Okay, thank you. All right. All right. Go ahead.
I move to confirm the agenda.
Second. So the new agenda is confirmed and seconded. So all those raise your hands for aye. Okay. And that is 5 votes. So any votes no? Any abstentions? Okay, 1 abstention. So the motion passes. Thank you. Okay. So on to our agenda. The first is a Lunar New Year proclamation. And I'd like to thank Councilmember Mata for bringing this forward to our city council. Okay. And I will read this now. So whereas the Lunar New Year is celebrated each year on the 2nd new moon after winter solstice on the lunisolar calendar on many parts of Asia and in Asian communities around the world, and whereas the Lunar New Year is observed on January 22nd, 2023, ushering in the Year of the Rabbit, and in Vietnam, the Year of the Cat, and whereas Burien is home to more than 5,000 residents of Asian descent, and whereas Burien Community Connector Ellie Trin installed a commemorative Lunar New Year display at the Burien Community Center in January 2023, making it the first Lunar New Year display ever installed in a City of Burien-owned facility. And whereas while different cultures may have their own unique celebrations, The Lunar New Year is widely observed as a time for family, traditions, reflections, and hope for the future. Now, therefore, the City Council of the City of Burien, Washington, does hereby ask all Burien community members to join together to proclaim January 22nd, 2023 as Lunar New Year. And Councilmember Mata, did you have someone here to accept the proclamation?
I'm not sure if that got organized correctly, but I just want to thank the council for approving this proclamation. Secondly, as we start learning how to interact with one and each other as different cultures, different beliefs, different religions. I mean, I think that's what really makes America. And, I'm very grateful to my parents who brought me to the country of opportunities, and I'm thankful to them. But I also want to just inform our Latino community and this community in general that the Lunar New Year, there's a couple of places in South America that the Lunar New Year is celebrated, which is Peru, and we have a Peruvian restaurant in Bambam. And as we see the Asian culture and the Asian community flourish in our community, not only the Chinese, Vietnamese, our Filipino community, I want to recognize our mayor, who is the first Filipina woman to serve our community as mayor, and I'm very proud to see that. And so today, let's celebrate our differences, but at the same time, what we're trying to really build in our local community, which is that we're all here to live together and to be able to, we have a community where we can all thrive and our children can live the American dream of going to college and being able to pay for their college. And for those individuals that college may not be the thing like myself, and to be able to build a career in some trade, to be able to make sure that we push in our country. So with that, I'm very grateful for this proclamation. I think Burien in the last 6 years that I've been elected, we're moving in the direction of Burien is for everybody, regardless of where you come from. So thank you very much, Mayor, for the time that you've given me to be able to give a couple of words for tonight. And we do have Wakus in Burien, and we also have the Hong Kong market, and we have several other Vietnamese communities. In fact, I get my hair cut with Hina, and I want to thank them for contributing to our community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Excuse me, Councilmember Mata. Well, once a mayor, always a mayor. It's still your title. Thank you. And thank you everyone and guests for coming today to celebrate this first New Year proclamation. So thank you.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
since we have representatives here, would you like to take a photograph?
Oh, sure. Would you like to, with the council?
I didn't know there was somebody there in the chambers. Thank you very much, Michael Chain, for coming. Michael's been part of Wakus for over 30 some years. And so he is really part of our community. So I'm so happy that you're there. Thank you. And happy.
Okay, so our next presentation is a public health presentation related to airport and aircraft exposure. And we have as our guest, Dr. Kris Johnson, PhD, Public Health, Seattle, King County. And I just want to give a little bit of background in that this is information that the city of Burien shared with our airport city partners. And it was information that was found very compelling actually by our START partners. And so we wanted to bring it forward here to the city council. And because Boulevard Park is under the flight path and we're moving towards a comprehensive plan in that area, I think this is information that the council should be aware of. So thank you, Dr. Johnson, for coming. And I'm just going to turn it over to you.
Well, thank you for having me. This was a study done by, here, you're going to watch me practice the slides. It's been a while. All right. I might need you to click for me. Let's move. So I'll say next slide. You're going to have to tolerate that. Thank you for your patience. So this was a study that Public Health of Seattle and King County conducted in 2019 and 2020. It was requested by the Washington State Legislature. We're very grateful to Senator Kaiser and Representative Orwell for their support designing the ask and then making sure there was funding for it. This is not a health impact study. The health impact assessments are much more formal. What we were asked to do is what you see on the screen. We were asked to do a comprehensive review of the literature. What do we know about airport-related pollution and its impact on human health? And then we were asked to use available data to look at community health in those communities within 10 miles of the airport. The concentric circles that you see are what we looked at. And again, this was based on the ask of the legislature. So the first circle, we looked at communities, residents who lived within 1 mile of SeaTac Airport, between 1 and 5 miles, and then 5 and 10 miles of SeaTac Airport. Please note, so there's air pollution that comes, what we learned is there's air pollution that comes from airport operations, both ground vehicle and also the airplanes themselves, aircraft. There's also within these concentric circles, we just need to acknowledge that there's also the King County Airport, municipal airport, and then I-5 and 99. So you've got other sources of pollution there. Let's see, did it work? Oh, you're doing it, sorry. Did I do it too? This would be the comedy portion. So one of the things that we learned right away, and I'm relatively new, I've been here about 3 years from the Midwest. One of the things that we learned is the majority of King County's people of color live within 10 miles of SeaTac Airport. It is, if you look at 75% of Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders, almost 75% of Black residents and African-American residents. And it's true, right? Over half of Hispanic or Latino residents live within this area. And from now on, when I say airport communities, I mean communities within 10 miles of SeaTac Airport. It's also about half of our Asian residents live here. Compared to the rest of the county, this area also has a slightly higher but significant proportion of children and immigrants residing. So that was the first big find, right? Is that by and large, it's communities of color that we're talking about. Overall, what we saw compared to the rest of the county is that these communities face both health disparities and resource disparities. In some cases, for a few outcomes, we were actually able to see that the closer one resides to the airport, the worse the conditions. For example, hospitalization rates for heart disease were highest for those who live within 1 mile of SeaTac, slightly lower for those who live within 5 to 10 miles, or sorry, 1 to 5 miles, slightly lower for 5 to 10 miles. And then all of those 3 rates are significantly higher than those of the rest of the county. So for the outcomes that you see on the screen, life expectancy, rate of death from heart disease, rates of death overall, and then hospitalization for heart disease, there was that correspondence where rates were highest when you were most proximal to the airport. Now, this is not, again, this is a descriptive analysis. So this is not causal at all. We can't say that these outcomes come from pollution. We can only say that these communities are already at risk. Because we don't know, right? For example, heart disease, right? There's other causes out there. So what we do know is that there are, right, the communities face health disparities, and those health conditions that put them at risk run through the life course from birth to death. So for example, mothers in airports communities are 43% more likely to have a premature birth than mothers in the rest of the county. It's not shown in the data, but it's also true that they're more likely to have children born with low birth weights. And then airport communities have twice as many children living in poverty compared to the rest of the county. And again, not shown in the data, but it's also true of adults. There's a higher percentage in airport communities of adults living in poverty compared to the rest of the county. Adults are more likely to be uninsured in airport communities than they are in the rest of the county. Airport communities also have a higher rate of hospitalization for a number of outcomes. There's a higher rate of hospitalization for heart disease, for stroke, diabetes, and then also for asthma that I'm not showing you, and the COPD, the chronic obstructive pulmonary disorder. The bar charts I want you to be able to see, the one on the left is the rate for the community that lives within 1 mile of SeaTac Airport. The next bar to the right is the 1 to 5 mile range. The third is the 5 to 10 miles. And then the last bar on the right is for the rest of the rate for the rest of the county. There's also a higher rate of deaths overall, I mentioned, in these airport communities compared to the balance of counties. And then that significant difference we also see within types. I mentioned heart disease, stroke, and a few others. So again, we're seeing that these are communities already at risk. They've got health conditions that can be aggravated, like the asthma, diabetes, that can be aggravated to exposures to pollutants. We also, I mentioned, conducted a literature review. A lot of this, when we conducted the literature review, we used the same methods, because I'm going to talk to you about what is a causal relationship and what is not. We use the same methods that the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, uses when they do their impact assessments on pollutants. So we did a strength of evidence analyses. And when I talk to you about there's a causal relationship or a likely causal relationship, meaning one causes this to happen, that is based on numerous studies with rigorous methods. So when I'm saying, right, so we adopted the same guidelines that the EPA uses in their review. And what you see when we're talking about pollution that comes out of the airport operations, we're talking about air pollution and noise pollution. The noise pollution, you all, I'm sure, are aware of what I'm talking about, right? I can stand at Saltwater Beach Park and I can count the flights going over me, right? We can all hear it. The FAA has a noise level threshold that is lower than that of what the World Health Organization recommends. So it's just interesting that there is this fight around standards, but the noise pollution definitely has an effect on health. It primarily affects attention and focus, and it's primarily through lack of sleep and stress. The air pollution comes from a number of sources. We've got the ozone and carbon dioxide. There's a number of hazardous air pollutants that are in there. We've also got particulate matter, which comes from things like smoke. But it also comes from plane exhaust and vehicle exhaust, and it comes in different sizes. But the air pollutions across the board are the air pollutants that stem from the exhaust that comes from planes and vehicles, cause respiratory problems, including asthma, the COPD that I mentioned. The air pollution exposures also cause cardiovascular issues, hypertension, which is high blood pressure, heart disease, heart attacks, and stroke. There's also nervous system implications, right? So exposure to air pollutions can cause dementia and can cause oxidative stress. The oxidative stress system is what monitors our overall biology, right? And can change with different exposures. The metabolic issues, I mentioned diabetes. And then reproductive health concerns. There's a number of studies out of Los Angeles right now that show that particulate matter that I'm talking about, particulate matter at the size of 2.5 and then very, very small. And all of this particulate matter is smaller than, right, a grain of hair. Those some of that particulate matter can pass through the bloodstream, and so then does cause preterm birth and low birth weight. There's also a new study suggesting that it causes brain cancer. We don't know, when I say exposure to these air pollutants, we don't know exactly how much exposure, but through animal studies and studies of large populations, birth cohorts, we know that exposure causes harm. We might not know how much exposure, but we know that exposure causes harm. So that was the summary of the literature review, right? Is that we understand now that there is this causal impact on health that is negative. What we also wanted to know, I mentioned exposure. We wanted to know, well, what do we know about exposure here? We definitely, in the literature and in studies, we need to better understand what amount of exposure leads to these health conditions that I mentioned. Locally, we know there was a 2018 Beacon Hill study that showed that the noise levels resulting from planes going overhead did surpass that FAA threshold. And that threshold was set based on our health. So noise levels from planes have, in 2018, we have data that shows that it surpassed levels that were set to protect our health. We also know the 2019 Puget Sound Clean Air Agency shows that particulate matter levels were over EPA recommendations. So we basically had some early data that shows that occasionally we're surpassing limits that were set to protect our health. We don't know a lot. We also, when I'm talking about air pollution, that ultra-fine particulate matter is not regulated by the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, and so we don't know as much about it. So at the same time that the Washington State Legislature asked us to do this examination of existing data and a look at the evidence, what do we know to date? They also asked a University of Washington Seattle team out of the Environmental and Occupational Sciences Division to look at this ultrafine particulate matter, because it's very new. So again, particulate matter comes when we burn things, when we're burning fuel, when we're burning wood stoves, right? It's what makes the air hard to breathe when we have wildfires. And it comes in different sizes. What this team learned, what they wanted to do was look at the concentration of ultrafine particulate matter and understand how present is it in plane exhaust and also ground vehicle exhaust, car and truck exhaust. So they studied it in two ways, and they're basically trying to measure the concentration of UFPs, or ultrafine particulate matter. Why we're worried about ultrafine particulate matter is because what the animal studies have shown us, it is so small, it actually can travel through the cell barriers, and it causes inflammation in the lungs and inflammation in the brain. So the ultrafine particulate matter most directly leads to inflammation. And again, passes through cells, so it can travel through the bloodstream to different parts of the body. So that's why we're worried about it. And that's why we're worried that it's not regulated right now and not very frequently measured, therefore. What the UW team did is, over the course of a year, there's some fixed air quality monitors. Like I think there's one in Beacon Hill. And so they looked at fixed measures and took them right from these systems that measure air regularly. They also did mobile measurement. So they drove the paths that you see back and forth over the course of a year to measure air quality. And then they also at the same time measured temperature, wind, strength, et cetera, all the things that they need to know. They learned a couple of things out of their measurement. One, they learned that the pollution that comes from plane exhaust really does look different than the pollution that comes from cars and vehicles. That matters because it means we can track back sources. Prior to this, people were saying that you couldn't separate the difference, and that makes it hard to look at relationships. So it turns out, right, that we really can measure the difference. And there is ultrafine particulate matter that comes both from vehicle transportation and also plane exhaust. So their findings overall is that ultrafine particulate matter is a byproduct of burning both types of fuel, right? So it comes out of plane exhaust and car exhaust and truck exhaust. The concentration overall isn't distinguishable, but when we look at the type of pollution and the amount of ultrafine particulate matter, we can tell the difference between plane exhaust and vehicle exhaust. There's more ultrafine particulate matter coming out of the plane exhaust at a higher concentration. And then the fixed site monitoring was a way of double checking the mobile monitoring, and it showed the same patterns, right? Mayor Aragon mentioned the flight path. The concentrations were highest when planes land compared to takeoff, and the UW team is not quite sure why. So they've continued their work in part with the city funding. So thank you. They did some work with schools that the city's funded, including City of Burien, and thank you for doing that. They've done some work looking at air pollution and what is outside compared to inside. What that work showed is that by and large, the air pollution that we have outside is very easily traveling inside. So for example, there were a number of schools where they tested the air quality, and the amount of air pollution found outside the building was equivalent to that found inside the building. And we're not sure, it depends, it can change different times of year. That might be because windows were open, it might be because of the ventilation system. But one of the things that they learned, right, is that this air pollution is coming inside at high rates. But the second piece of it that they tested and shown is that portable HEPA air filtration cleaning units can effectively reduce the indoor air pollution. And again, they've tested that primarily in schools. So there is a way to mitigate exposure to air pollution, particularly for children. The other things they want to look at, there's a different team, the UW Earth Lab is looking at whether vegetation helps. In my opinion, the field's not very clear. Vegetation and trees help mitigate certain types of air pollution, but we don't know yet. There's some research that shows that it might be some types of leaves, not other leaves, right? So you have to have the right type of leaf, and it might be that we need big areas of greenery and forest and vegetation in order to effectively clean the air, right? So having sporadic trees might not do it. There's one study that basically hypothesized that we have to have 200 square meters of forests in order for green space or greenery to help with air pollution. But there's a team at the UW that's going to study that, so we'll know more soon. And then the other piece they want to do is look at the content and better understand what is coming out of plane exhaust, what is coming out of vehicle exhaust, so that we can understand that a bit more. So that's some of the work that they're going to be doing. We're nearing the end, so if you have some questions, let me know. I wanted to make the point before we talk about next steps and recommendations, just that we know that airport communities face a number of challenges beyond the health disparities and the resource disparities that I talked about. What you're going to see on the right this is from a Seattle Times article about redlining. So we know there's this correspondence between historical and structural racism and these airport communities. And that matters, because it indicates that we have some responsibility, maybe beyond general protection of human health. If we want to make progress toward equity, then we need to be able to protect health in these communities. The graphs that you'll see underneath, the figure in green, it's very hard to see, but I wanted to just have you see the shape and understand that we're talking about the same region of King County. So the map with the green background is rates of asthma hospitalization. And you'll see where the darker colors are is where the rates are higher. And then the box or map to the far left is King County's social vulnerability index, which is based on a number of factors, including income, level of housing, things like that. But the social vulnerability index indicates that these are populations that are facing disparities and have suffered from historical and structural racism. And so this cumulative risk matters because there's a lot of data out there. So for example, when we all breathe in air pollution, those of us with asthma or respiratory issues or diabetes or are more obese are going to struggle more and are more likely to suffer adverse health effects at breathing air pollution than other people are. So some of these health disparities that we're talking about put people at greater risk when they're exposed to the same levels of air pollution. And then we also know that people within these communities are more likely to be exposed compared to those of us who might live in Seattle downtown or other parts of King County. So that was a quick overview. The recommendations are very general. Again, this report came out in 2020. The recommendations are general because it's going to take action at multiple levels in order to protect human health from air pollution and noise pollution that is airport related. There are things that can only be done at the federal level. They regulate the flight paths. And there's options. There's a number of programs, like there's a federal improvement. I always call it FIP. It's federal improvement project, but you basically can petition. So the Port of Seattle can petition FAA for money and then invest it in the communities as a way of mitigating adverse health effects. So there's options like that that can be done at the federal level, and then there's things that can be done at the state, and then there's things that the county can do. But overall, what we recommend is addressing the health disparities of airport communities. So if we improve basic health, if everyone's got access to health insurance, if everyone's got access to health care, then we're investing in protecting their health. And so increasing health equity is going to protect people a little bit. So we should do that. We also should continue to think about how to mitigate the health impacts of airport exposure to pollutants. I think the other thing we can do is continue to do research. It would be great to further develop and have a systemic monitoring system so that we understand air pollution on a more comprehensive level, right? So a systematic monitoring system. And then I think supporting research to further address our gaps in knowledge. But there's certainly a lot that we can do to mitigate exposures. And I think the HEPA portable air filter units are a move toward that direction. There are references, if you want to share the presentation, the UW team has a number of pieces out there, are policy briefs, web pages that are easy to digest, not long academic studies. And then the report that I mentioned is online with an executive summary if it's useful to folks. So the presentation, I don't know if folks can access it, but there are notes in the notes section that link you to other materials. And then just let me know if you have any questions.
Any questions for Dr. Johnson? Okay, Councilmember Sarah, then the Deputy Mayor.
I don't have a lot of questions because you covered that pretty thoroughly. And I wish I could say that a lot of it was a surprise. A lot of it, I live about 3 miles from the airport and watch the flights come over, and distinctly remember having a child having an asthma attack and keeping them calm by watching the planes landing. And, you know, the sort of ironic disconnect of those two things at the same time. It seems like many of the solutions are going to take concerted, interlocal, state, national effort, and that those HEPA filters are something that can be done quickly and have returns really fast, and that there's something we need to think about. How can we make that happen? Not because that's a solution, but because that's going to make people healthier quickly and address some of those, you know, immediate impacts. I do have questions about the hyperlocality of things. How long do micro or ultrafine particles stay in the air, and where do they go when they come out of the air? And the trees that are like really good at getting them out of the air, are they in the trees? And then when parts of those trees die in the fall, are they in the leaves in the ground? So kind of the continuing cycle of that, it must be accumulating.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's a great question. So there's more to learn. So when you talk about, you know, the ultrafine particulate matter and what happens to it, we have more to learn. And this is not my area of specialty. This is where I wish the UW team was here to talk to you. They're much more articulate about this. It does sound like, so when planes are 3,000 meters above us or below, then that's when we are seeing more air pollution fall down toward us. When they're above the 3,000 meters, the air pollution tends to stay up above where the planes are and instead have an overall greenhouse effect rather than transmit down to us. But when the planes are lower than that 3,000 meters, then it is falling. It's interesting because you alluded to this. The air pollutants, as they fall, they might recombine. So the hazardous air pollutants, right, the HAPs, things change in form. And that's one of the reasons the UW wants to study concentrations and what makes up, you know, the air pollution and the particulate matter, is to better understand how it's changing as it falls downward. So that I can't tell you much more than that because we need to study more to understand. But it's a good
Councilmember Mata?
question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No.
Okay. Councilmember Mata, do you have a question?
Yes, first of all, thank you very much for the information you've given. And I'm just, what I'm concerned about sometimes when I hear about the airport, living in the airport community, speaking different languages under Title VI, under the Federal Act, it talks about the rights that we have under the Federal Act 1964. Says that English proficiency will be something that will not be a barrier when it comes to representing people in the community that is not English proficiency. And some of these reports that I've seen, I've just never seen them in a different language, and it may be that I'm maybe visiting them in the wrong place. But do you know anywhere else I could pick up this information, regardless if it's in Vietnamese or Spanish, on being able to inform and educate some of the community around the airport that is not proficient in English?
That's a great point to bring up. We need to do more translation. And I think I'm remembering I was listening to a community health worker talk during a listening session recently. And she was basically reminding me not to think about just interpreting it into different languages, but let's make it accessible English first and then translate it into other languages, which is another valid point. And I think you are right. We need to do more of that. I think the good news is public health has some options for that. And I know there's one of the nonprofits in King County has put together a proposal for how to educate, how to share information with expecting mothers and families, and has basically put together a project about proposing how do we educate people about this and connect them to resources that already exist, like the asthma prevention programs or mitigation programs that exist in the county. So how do we make sure that people have this information in lots of different languages, and then also know about services that we can link them to? So I think you are right that the work needs to be done, and we have the help and can work on that in the next few months.
Well, I would appreciate that, because I know that under the Executive Order 13166 signed on August 11th, 2000, the FFA says it's reasonable for ensuring that the limited English proficient individuals have a meaningful access to the benefits and services of the airport, receiving federal financial assistance. The FFA requires that airport sponsors identify possible limited English proficiency. And so we can go on, but I just think that this is long overdue. And being an airport city, I would ask that the commissioners and the representatives of the airport continue to make this a priority, although it's costs money, but at the end of the day, when we have the side effects of health impacts in our community, I think that that does not have a price to it. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you for the question and point.
Thank you. Any other questions for Dr. Johnson? Well, thank you very much for your presentation, and this is really important information to know. I'm really struck by the health disparities, particularly the one you noted for Black and African American moms for preterm, because that is a recognized health disparities nationwide. So it's concerning if there are conditions that worsen that for that population.
Yes. Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you. All right. So next on our agenda are council reports. Do any council members have anything to share? Okay, hearing none, the city manager's report.
Thank you, Mayor. I just have a few items to share with council. The first is a request from the port and from our START committee. There is an effort to pull together what is being referred to as a fly-in, where member cities from START visit Washington to essentially lobby on our own behalf to make changes, to request improvements. The port is requesting, if there is interest, to have 2 representatives from each city attend the fly-in. The proposed dates are in mid to late April, and I believe it is April 25th, 26th, and 27th. And I would like to ask if there are any members of council that are interested in attending. And if there are not 2 members of council interested in attending, if council is interested in having a staff member or 2 staff members attend on their behalf.
Deputy Mayor.
I'd be interested in attending. And also for those of us who are going to the National League of Cities Congressional City Conference, we should set up meetings with our through our federal lobbyist, Mike Doubleday, to have meetings with Congressman Smith and Congressman Jayapal about this as well, because in previous lobbying Hill days, we've done so. So I think, and that's in March, so that'd be a month before these fly-ins anyways, but it doesn't hurt to keep this in front of people's agendas.
Is it possible for an airport committee member to attend, as well as potentially staff, council member? And we do have a liaison to start also. I'm just throwing that out there in terms of who should we be thinking about, given some of the folks have been pretty immersed for a while.
It is possible for the city to ask a member of committee to attend or a representative to start that is not an employee or council. The challenge is reimbursement. They would have to travel on their own,
Oh, okay.
own funding.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Sarah?
I would be interested and
Okay,
should be able to swing the time.
great. So it looks like Councilmember Sarah and Deputy Mayor Schilling are interested.
Great, thank you both. I've taken note and I will share your names with START. A few other items. One is just a reminder that we have a future meeting council to review candidates to committees. The clerk will brief council on that at a future meeting. We do continue to have a few vacancies, so if you know of anyone in the community that is interested, please encourage them to speak with staff. We are working to pull together the presentations created or that were requested by council, including policing options, and then also additional information regarding staircase at Eagle Landing. We hope in the future to have more information to share with council. And that is all I have for council today.
Great. Thank you very much, City Manager. So next we'll have public comments and I'll turn it over to our city clerk to announce the guidelines.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The City of Burien values public input, and we follow specific guidelines to ensure the process is open and fair for all. To facilitate an efficient public comment period, community members are encouraged to sign up to speak by 6:45 PM or to submit a written comment using the public comment form or by emailing cityclerk@burienwa.gov. The order in which City Council will receive comments will be as follows. First, we'll call on those who have signed up to speak. Second, we'll call on those who have used the raise hand feature on Zoom or have requested to speak in chambers. Any submitted written comments will be forwarded to the City Council and noted in the meeting minutes. Additionally, community members must consider to limit remarks to 2 minutes or less, and the total time allotted for the comment period is 30 minutes. At this time, Deputy Clerk Ivins will share the public comment sign-up list. And for those attending in person, please be prepared to speak at the lectern. And for those attending on Zoom, please be prepared to unmute yourself. And the first person signed up to speak is Anna Denton.
Thank you, thank you. I'm Anna Denton. I am a resident in the 2 square blocks of single-family homes west of the Burien Community Center. I'm commenting on the fact of the AMBOM corridor plan. We moved in 60 years ago when 148th was just 2 lanes and Burien wasn't a city. I am opposed to the residential high-density rezoning of the single-family homes shown on the proposed zoning maps on page 71 of the AMBOM Boulevard draft plan, allowing buildings of 6 to 7 stories. These are single-family homes where I live, with families that are looking forward to sending their children to Seahurst Elementary School. And they may have members who walk already to the transit center, to the library and other facilities. They have yards and gardens to work and play in. Where will they find a replacement facility in the Burien area? On page 69 of the plan, you suggest to allow a variety of home types with a range of price points. I agree on that. On page 70, you encourage family size dwelling units. That's fine. Make up your mind. Why would you want to rezone the family size dwelling units that we already have? On page 71 in alternative 3, you also show a rezone north of 146th. You rezone more single-family homes to residential high, again allowing anywheres up to 6 to 7 story units. All along AMBOM is high-density zoning, and the buses run on AMBOM and can take you to the transit center and beyond. Why be in such a rush? Let people move into the apartments by the post office that are being built.
Ms. Denton.
And then the low-income apartments
Ms.
that are
Denton, I'm going to have to ask you.
going to be
wrap it up,
built on
please.
8th Avenue Southwest. Take a fresh look at things. And do we really need apartments? Build them on AMBOM.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next person signed up to speak is Joanne Pasek.
Hi, I'm Joanne Pasek, and I'm here also to talk about the proposed AMBOM Boulevard Park Plan. And I live within the red zone that's being proposed for 6th to 8th Avenue Southwest and 146 to 148 Southwest. And I know that this is the only area in Burien which is being rezoned from single-family homes directly to high-density housing. There's no medium density, no missing middle. It's straight to 6 to 7 story buildings. I was shocked that I had not heard about the plan until a little over 2 weeks ago when it was almost already finalized. Yet it's been in the works since 2021 for at least 1.5 years. I've talked to over 25 of my neighbors and not one single person had heard about this plan, not even one. We received no notice, nothing in the mail. And in the past 2 weeks, I've received more about the new Burien tree cutting rules than I have about being rezoned to allow for 7-story buildings. We had no input, no say, and we should have been included in this process from the very start. Now we're looking at being forced out of our homes. Our long-established diverse neighborhood is very vulnerable. About half the families on our block are renters, and they face eviction from their homes if their homes are sold. Those who are left face construction noise, disruptions, and pressure from developers to sell. Please note that there's no requirement for affordable housing in this plan. And I ask you, is this fair? Is this just? Is this how responsible government acts? Is this a government that truly cares and listens to its citizens? I ask that you reject this plan and the proposed rezoning. We need to start this process again with true community input. And very briefly, I just want to bring to your attention, there was an editorial in yesterday's paper in the Seattle Times. And the headlines say, serve the people, not the developers. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. The next person we have signed up to speak is Jesse Drucker. And I'm sorry, I'm not seeing Jesse online at this moment, so we will go on to John White.
My subject almost seems not even worth talking right now, but I just want to bring up Eagle Landing again and say thank you for the decision the city council made to put this on the agenda. Thank you to Hugo for reaching out and other people that have supported me on the drive to get the stairs back into operation. I wanted to mention to you in 1994, there was an earthquake in Santa Monica and the bridges collapsed and they were damaged, but there was no way we were going to tear them all down. We had to get them up and running in 140 days. C.C. Myers was the contractor. They called in all the experts. I was called in to help shore up those bridges. And we did it in 66 days. And the Caltrans, who paid me to come up with the machines to do that work, thanked me, awarded me with payments. And C.C. Myers walked away with $14 million for finishing ahead of schedule. They finished in 66 days. And I can say that that is minor. The bridge piers, the stair piers at Eagle Landing are peanuts compared to this. And I am assuring you that the first 8 piers are perfect. The 9th pier, it's going to take a little work. The 10th pier, even more work, about $67,000 probably to fix it. Anyway, I thank you and I look forward to the agenda and my chance to speak more on this. And thank you for your time.
Thank you. The next person we have signed up to speak is Marilyn Yim, on Zoom. Marilyn, if you would please unmute yourself at this time.
Good evening. My name is Marilyn Yim, and I'm commenting on item 11C on the agenda, the repeal of Burien's unconstitutional law restricting fixed-term leases. The measure of a good law shouldn't be whether you get sued or whether it's later determined to be unconstitutional. It should be whether you follow due diligence, involve all of the stakeholders to develop better policy, and whether it then achieves the goals and intent of the law. Let me ask you, does the city council want renters to be able to live in the city of Burien, especially renters with families? If so, you're going to have to think about who will offer that housing. Small-scale rental housing offers a diversity and affordability of rental housing types, equitable ownership, which helps build generational wealth for BIPOC people and immigrants like my husband. It's an anti-displacement tool, and it assists residents to age in place. Does the city want the benefits of having more small-scale, community-based missing middle rental housing? If so, then please use this experience as a learning opportunity. Burien had the longest-lasting pandemic-era eviction moratorium. In addition, hastily rushed through changes to landlord-tenant law have dealt a heavy blow. Seattle passed similar laws and had a net loss of 20% of its rental housing in 2 years. Nearly all of this was the 1 to 4 unit missing middle housing that families need. You don't have to take it from me. Burien has a registry of every rental property in the city. You know where to find your housing providers, so please ask them. I'm asking you to take stock of what has happened. Conduct listening sessions and roundtables with your small mom and pop, nonprofit, and low-income rental housing providers, property managers with mom and pops as clients, and even developers who have applied for multifamily building permits. Ask them whether the city's current suite of laws is encouraging more rental housing or is a barrier. What can the city do to help more people become small housing providers, stabilizing their own housing while offering housing to others, investing in their community, and building equity? Do thoughtful outreach, document what you hear, make it public, and implement it. This can only help you develop better, more sustainable housing policy and avoid problems like the one you were fixing today and which I hope you fix at the earliest opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. The next person we have signed up to speak is Rick Sands.
Hi there. Longtime listener of you guys, first time speaking up here. So thank you for letting me speak. I'm going to springboard off of John White here with Eagle Landing Park. I live right downtown across from Library Park. My office is right across the street here. I've sold real estate in this town for 27 years. And there's parts of this city that are great. Neighborhoods, all the neighborhoods are diverse, different, great. And Eagles Landing, when I'm in Seahurst and going around showing different places in Burien that are attract people to come into our city to buy a home, I always go by there. It's great. And it helps merchants. And I've walked it many times. I raised 2 daughters here. And the people that come and do those stairs, West Seattle people, they go and have coffee, they have lunch in Old Burien. And so it's great. And I hope the city council considers maybe putting a group together, helping, and I'm happy to help out however I can help, and to keep it alive and repair it. And I think that I speak for a lot of people. I spend my days either driving or walking up and down the road and talking to people because I enjoy doing that. And anytime Eagle Landing comes up in a conversation, there's a smile on their face. And people have taken their kids there, and now their kids take their kids there. So please consider and keep it in the forefront. And let's see if we can get that thing fixed and make it better. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. The next person we have signed up to speak is Serena Newburn.
Dear City Council, I am a resident of Central Burien, and I'm here today to voice my opposition to the Ambom and Boulevard Park Community Plan. The Planning Committee says social equity was a guiding principle throughout the planning process, but what is equitable about new development where rents are for local businesses and residents will likely double? The Maverick in downtown Burien has a minimum rent of $3,000 for a 2-bed, 2-bath apartment. This is hardly affordable and certainly not enough space for multi-generational families, many of whom live in Burien and Boulevard Park. The Connect building, which is being touted as Lux Living and in construction on 150th Street, also likely isn't to produce affordable housing. I ask you, are these the types of apartments we'll continue to see with this plan? Does the community really know this is what's coming based on your engagement strategy? Or are you trying to gloss over that with PR and buzzwords by renaming these nodes to honor its history and create a few open spaces and plazas while displacing the residents? Who is going to hold these developers accountable to make all units affordable and not just a small percentage? Rezoning disproportionately forces out people of color. It happened in Greenpoint and Williamsburg in New York, where the population grew by 20,000, yet the Latino population decreased by 15,000. And it will happen here too, because the city is targeting predominantly low-income minority neighborhoods for rezoning. This plan wasn't built with social equity in mind, and the city needs to do a thorough racial impact study before any decisions are made on rezoning. Burien is trying to displace the very people that make it what it is today. We need a new development plan that doesn't displace people. Thank you.
Thank you. The next person we have signed up to speak is Kathy Palmer.
I am against the zoning the rezoning of the area bounded by 146th and 148th Southwest and 6th and 8th Avenues Southwest. Changing the zoning from single-family residence would not only reclassify the land, it would destroy something vital, a neighborhood. These were the words used in 1980 when I spoke to the King County Planning Committee on this subject. They still apply. Up to 7-story buildings would make this parcel of land look like the massive development at First Avenue and 112th in the Top Hat area, creating canyons and broken sight lines, and also the effects of extra traffic would be huge, especially in the areas where you only have 2-lane roads. Why our neighborhood when there are underdeveloped or undeveloped parcels on 11th Avenue Southwest between 146th and 142nd? And why not use the land on 149th and 150th between 8th and 6th Avenue Southwest, adjacent to the 2 apartment complexes under construction, removing 10 or so buildings rather than almost 50 well-maintained residences doesn't make sense. Both of these options are only 1 to 3 blocks from a bus line if Burien is concerned with transit using. Personally, I would like the following questions answered. Is there a developer already selected? Which one? What is the timeline for the changes? When would we have to move? Some of us are on limited incomes. How do we make rental or house payments that are sure to be higher than we have now? Would help be available to mitigate the mental and emotional effects of the loss of our neighborhood?
Thank you. The next person we have signed up to speak is Kelsey Vanhee.
Hi, my name is Kelsey and I recently started as a volunteer at the Burien Severe Weather Shelter. I know many of our council members volunteer their time and donate supplies to the shelter, and I want to thank you for that. One thing we could use support for is raising awareness about when the shelter is open and the need for volunteers. Because it is based on weather, the shelter doesn't have a predictable schedule, which can make it challenging for folks in our community to plan ahead and make time to volunteer. Right now, we have a need for the next 2 days, and if anyone here or at home watching on Zoom would like to sign up, the information to do so can be found on the B-Town blog and on our Burien Severe Weather Shelter Facebook page. Thank you, council members, for all of your support, and please continue to help us raise awareness about the essential work of the shelter so that it can continue. Thank you.
Thank you. The next person we have signed up to speak is Tori Newburn.
Hello, thank you for having me speak. Okay, thanks for having me speak. I'm here to say that I oppose the rezoning for the Ambom and Boulevard corridor. If it wasn't for our neighbor, we wouldn't even know about it. And I feel like after I found out about it, I listened to their Zoom, I read the entire document, and I feel like they are being deceiving and performative. This information is not out there for the residents, and it's huge swaths of land to be rezoned up and down Ambom and in Boulevard Park. These areas, looking on the map, one, it's my neighborhood, but the additional neighborhoods, these are all like middle income and low income housing that they're planning on targeting. These are not the higher like $1 million homes and then some. They're targeting neighborhoods of color and income disparities. Also, like, people don't want to go from single family residences to a skyrise apartment and a condo building. Our neighbor is multi-generational, 3 generations. They own a landscaping business, and a house that they're renting is perfect for their family as opposed to an apartment or a condo. It would push them out. It would push a lot of people out. I only have 30 seconds left. In addition, there's going to need, they want to grow by 25% in population over the next 20 years, but there's no talk about increasing fire, police, EMS, any of the infrastructure, utilities, roads, traffic, and none of that is addressed in the plan. So I want to say that I'm opposed to it, and I hope there will be more time to discuss this before it gets voted on. So thank you.
Thank you. The next person we have signed up to speak is Charles Schaefer.
So not why I came up here tonight, but really quick for all the Ambon Boulevard Park folks, I just wanted to point out that this is only a draft plan and just encourage you all to come to the planning commission and to weigh in. I'm actually signed up to agree with something Councilmember Morris said at a previous meeting about looking at our model for policing and reevaluating that. Although interestingly, I don't agree with the reason given that the sheriff's office is too political. I think if we were to, for example, have our own department, it would just move the politics from the county level down to the city level. It's not going to go away. But I do think as a general rule, having government being local and accountable is preferable. I would cite an example of several years ago, we went from contracting with King County for animal control to Burien Cares. And it's very hard to find anybody who has anything bad to say about Burien Cares. I would also note that this is over half of our city budget. And as your city attorney sometimes points out, police power is in the state constitution. It's a core function of state government. You spend a lot of time on much less important matters or discussing things that are smaller amounts of money, which as you should, you're doing your due diligence. But I feel like it would be almost negligent for you to ignore something that's over half the city budget. And we haven't seriously looked at this in over a decade. And all I'm asking is for more information. And I look forward to seeing this on a future agenda. Maybe the sheriff's office is giving us a great value and maybe we should stick with it. I don't think we know. I think we should look into it. So look forward to seeing it come up again. Thank you.
Thank you. The next person we have signed up to speak is Mark Oplinger.
Good evening. My name is Mark Oplinger. I'm here to speak on the Ambam corridor rezoning proposal. I'm here to support it, and I'm here to support it at its option 3, which is the enhanced version. I am a resident, fairly new to Burien. I live just west of the Ambam corridor. I'm an architect. I'm actually relocated to Burien because my neighborhood in Seattle that I lived in for over 25 years also got upzoned, and I fully supported that as well. We need more housing. Housing, it's essential to mitigating homelessness. This plan has been thoughtfully developed. Sounds like there was a few areas that need to be readdressed, some communication issues and so on, given the prior comments. But all in all, I think it's been done and developed respectfully and thoughtfully, not just relative to homelessness, but also to creating vibrant communities and enhancing business opportunities as well. So again, I fully support this. I think Burien has an opportunity to be a regional leader, and I hope they go forward and implement option 3. Thank you.
Thank you. The next person we have signed up to speak is Janelle Emily on Zoom. Janelle, if you would please unmute yourself at this time.
Good evening, Mayor, Mayor Aragon, City Manager Bailon, City Staff, and City Council. I'd just like to read something that we sent to the City Council and City Staff earlier this week. To fully understand and appreciate the point of having an environmental impact statement, we have to consider the impact on the environment that is currently occurring and is known to have already impacted residents of at least Boulevard Park, and most likely also those of Ambon Boulevard. We can't talk about the environmental impact statement for the Boulevard Park and the Ambon corridor without talking about the lack of adequate infrastructure that is already causing environmental impacts and degradation that led to Burien needing to do the Boulevard Park flood reduction study in the first place. We're talking about an environmental impact review for the Boulevard Park and Ambon corridor, considering future impact, yet where language should read as need, it is being read as could. For example, it reads as follows, and it can be found in the environmental impact statement, but I'll skip over that. But terminology such as could when discussing current events, impacts, and minimizes and disregards the purpose of an environmental impact review could indicates that it could not happen at all, which means that the current environmental impacts could possibly not be addressed, which would be completely going against any scientific and professional recommendations on how to address the current environmental impact crisis to Boulevard Park. What exactly is the point of having an environmental impact review for the future if we can't even address the present environmentally impactful problems in the review area? Before development can be seriously considered in Boulevard Park, solutions identified in the Boulevard Park flood reduction project must be executed, and stormwater facilities in the area need to be made adequate. A failure to do so directly and indirectly will exacerbate current drainage and flooding problems that go against and undermine scientific and professional recommendations. There has been a clearly laid out path in the Boulevard Park flood reduction project on what needs to be done, and the time to implement is now. If not now, then when? And you can find more comments in there in the review and in the email. And I hope that you guys print that in the minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. The next person we have signed up to speak is Daniel Martin. Daniel, if you'd please unmute yourself at this time.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, Council, and City staff. I'm Daniel Martin, an organizer and overnight host for the Burien Severe Weather Shelter. I wanted to thank you for your continued support for the Severe Weather Shelter. This is a life-saving measure and a crucial service in our city, and I'm very thankful that you see the need for it and provide some funding and support for our neighbors who'd otherwise be sleeping outside. Last night, all 50 of our beds were filled at the shelter, and we do continue to need all the help we can get. I would like to encourage our neighbors to volunteer and donate at buriensws.org, Burien for severeweathershelter.org, and Burien SWS on Facebook. This stopgap measure highlights that the housing crisis in our area remains real and critical. We need more housing of all types and more services for those who are falling through the cracks. Thank you for your time and good night.
Thank you. And at this time, I'd like to ask if anyone else who has not signed up to speak would like to share at this time. And if so, if you'd please proceed to the lectern or raise your hand on Zoom at this time. Madam Mayor, does not look like anyone else would like to speak, so close public comment.
Okay, thank you very much. So public comment is now closed and there's a request for a 10-minute recess. Okay, folks? Okay, so we will reconvene at 8:40. Okay, it is now 8:40.
Oh, no, oh, no.
And my laptop. Sorry. And my laptop is. Oops. Sorry, re-adjournment accident. I knew this would. That's right. If there are no objections. All right, everyone, my apologies. Little bit of an accident. So we will now reconvene the Burien City Council. And our next item is the consent agenda, so I'll entertain a motion at this time.
I move to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the consent agenda. All of those in favor, please raise your hand or say aye. Okay, any nays? Abstentions? Okay.
I think Jimmy's gone too.
Yes, yes. So the motion passes 5 yeas and 1 abstention. So our next item is the Boulevard Park Draft Plan Update. And so I'll turn this over to Alex Hunt and Susan McLean.
Madam Mayor, I'm sorry, make clarification, point of clear information. Just for the record, the vote was 4 yeas, 1 abstention, correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, council members and city staff and members of the public. Thanks for being here tonight. My name is Susan McLean and I'm the Community Development Director. I'm joined by Alex Hunt, who is the star of this presentation tonight. He is a planner with the Department of Community Development. We've been working with people up and down the Ambom corridor and in Boulevard Park. We've had numerous meetings in the community to talk about the future of these neighborhoods. Part of the neighborhoods were incorporated a little bit later in Burien's history. And so part of this effort is looking at the quality of the neighborhoods. And also, as I think a lot of people pointed out today, looking at how the city can achieve some of its goals in terms of providing housing at a diversity of housing types and contributing to some of the region's environmental goals in terms of TOD, affordability, in new investment in areas where it's appropriate, that kind of thing. So we just wanted to begin our conversation with you that we hope takes place over the next 6 to 8 to 9 months about the future of Ambom and Boulevard Park, including land use decisions. Thank you.
Thanks for that introduction, Susan. And again, for the record, I'm Alex Hunt with the Community Development Department. If you could go to the next slide, please. So just an overview on what we're going to be discussing tonight. I'll give you a brief update on the community engagement that we've done to date for this plan. I'll give you an introduction to the draft documents, the sub-area plan for Ambom and Boulevard Park, as well as the environmental impact statement. I'll let you know about some of the land use alternatives and potential zoning that will come out of this draft planning effort. And then I'll open it up for discussion with council and address any questions you have. Next slide, please. So just to reorient us to this community planning effort, since it's been a while since I've spoken with you all about this. This is a sub-area plan for 2 different neighborhoods, 2 different sub-areas, the Ambom corridor and Boulevard Park. The Ambom corridor is the future home of the Rapid Ride H line, and Boulevard Park was annexed in 2010, and council originally started up this planning effort as a way to kind of get investment back into that neighborhood. So throughout this process, we have done a lot of community engagement with the diverse communities here, done our best to work with as many people as we can to articulate a community vision and develop strategies as part of this planning effort. And then thinking about how we leverage transit improvements, especially along Ambom, to get some of that transit-oriented development and walkable business districts and vibrant business districts here in these two sub areas. And then from that vision, setting the stage for the next 20 years of these neighborhoods through recommended land use and zoning changes, which would change land use regulation in these neighborhoods. And then throughout the work, applying a race and social equity lens in line with the comprehensive plan equity elements. Next slide, please. So just a quick reminder of how the equity framework factors into the Ambom and Boulevard Park plans. In the engagement stage, our focus was to kind of prioritize, put extra energy into reaching folks who stand to be most impacted by the plan, but who typically wield less influence in civic processes or planning efforts, who aren't typically reached. And then in the evaluation of proposals is the other place where the equity framework comes into play. So that's thinking about looking at each proposal and answering a set of questions on, does this provide access to folks? And on the other side, does it create burdens as listed below, cost burdens, displacement burdens, air quality and noise impacts, things like that. Next slide, please. And then just a quick summary of some of the engagement that we've done to date. We started off with a number of informal conversations, just trying to have one-on-one conversations with folks in the community, be it through Zoom meetings or phone calls, just to kind of understand assets and opportunities and vision here. We attended the Boulevard Park Block Party and talked to folks there. We launched an online interactive map tool back in 2021. We've stood up an advisory group made up of residents, business owners, Burien board and commission members, nonprofit housing providers, and we have just finished up our third advisory group meeting with them a few weeks ago. We had focused engagement aimed at reaching some of those groups that, as I mentioned, typically aren't reached. So met with groups of renters, met with a youth group out of the Alcove Apartments, held a number of visioning sessions in Spanish with some of these groups as well. And then we have been working with Burien boards and commissions to give them briefings and updates and solicit their feedback. We've had a number of in-person workshops in spring of last year to have our first kind of in-person, just out in the neighborhood visioning sessions with folks. Had a community scoping meeting in July to kick off the environmental impact statement process. And then we just concluded our draft plan review and our comment period just ended. We got a good number of comments through that as well. So just wanted to again remind you of some of the engagement that we've done. Next slide, please. And just to introduce you to the draft plan here. So there are a number of proposals or draft strategies that we're recommending based on what we've heard. And those recommendations can be broken down into these three kind of key concepts. One, strengthening ties to place. Two, safer and healthier communities. And three, growing with intention. So all of the proposals you find in the draft plan can be grouped under these three key concepts. So I'll give you some examples of some of the proposals coming out of this plan. Next slide, please. So strengthening ties to place, we heard a lot about people wanting to feel connected to their communities through community events, investment in places where the community can gather. People love their businesses, love small businesses and Ambom and Boulevard Park. So supporting businesses to alleviate displacement pressures, thinking about land use regulations and zoning to encourage walkable neighborhoods. Part of that, adding sidewalks in strategic locations to support that walkability, and then opportunities for public art as well. Next slide, please. Safer and healthier communities. Again, a lot of that is improving access, making it easier to walk, bike, and roll through your neighborhoods and in Ambom and Boulevard Park. And then thinking back to what Dr. Johnson was saying about air quality and noise impacts, thinking about the types of uses that we want to foster or promote in areas that are impacted by air and noise pollution, especially Boulevard Park under the flight path there. Implementing active transportation improvements, so that can be things like bicycle improvements. For example, an idea that was floated was an 8th Avenue Southwest bikeway as an alternative north-south connection to get bikers from off of Ambom to a safer, lower speed roadway. And then increasing food access in Boulevard Park is another example here. And that's something we heard a lot in our outreach in Boulevard Park after they lost the Thriftway a few years ago. Next slide, please. And then that last key concept, growing with intention, that's tied to a lot of the land use proposals that are coming out of this plan. So thinking about how we new zoning for multifamily, different types of housing and commercial, residential density and those supportive services and businesses in transit-oriented development areas. So leveraging rapid ride H-line improvement and thinking about how do we create land use regulations that are supported by high capacity transit, design standards that consider the relationship between buildings and the public streets, so storefronts, things like that, again, to support the walkability of these neighborhoods. And then thinking about getting the right mix of affordability. So expanding our multifamily tax exemption program to incentivize affordable housing in these two neighborhoods so that we are getting the, affordability levels that we know we need. And then this last one, providing additional stormwater detention facilities, looking at the kind of the environmental side to reduce high flows and reduce erosion as we see new development, making sure we're not having negative impacts to our stormwater systems. Next slide, please. So that was the sub-area plan document, kind of high-level overview of the proposals. I'll briefly touch on the environmental impact statement as well, also known as an EIS. This is a document that analyzes the probable environmental impacts of a proposed action. In this case, the proposed action is the Ambom and Boulevard Park Plan. So based on our community engagement, we developed 2 action alternatives, and those are the alternatives that you saw presented in the sub-area plan and the environmental impact statement that kind of look like zoning maps. And that's kind of the basis for analysis in the environmental impact statement. So we're using those proposed kind of land use scenarios to analyze environmental impacts from another number of different elements in the environmental impact statement. So this process allows for public input on the environmental analysis. And then any upfront environmental analysis that we do now, it allows future development to kind of be streamlined from that aspect so that individual projects don't have to go through their own environmental impact statement process, which can be timely and expensive and really inhibit development. Next slide, please. So just kind of an example of how the EIS process works. The EIS identifies potential impacts, and if impacts are likely based on that analysis, the EIS identifies potential mitigation measures. So you're basically identifying, documenting impacts, and then proposing mitigation measures to mitigate said impacts. Next slide, please. And then I'll get into some of those alternatives that I mentioned. This is kind of the draft framework that we're using to lay out the land use alternatives in the EIS. So we've got 4 kind of draft new zones here: the mixed use high, mixed use low, residential high, and residential medium. And each of those draft zones has different dimensional standards and allowed uses, so kind of different height limits and different uses allowed. So mixed use high would be up to 6 to 8 stories. Mixed use low would be, I think, base of 3 with up to 5 if you incorporate office or other commercial uses. Residential high would be that 6 to 7 story category at the 6 to 7 stories at the highest. And then residential medium is a maximum of 3 to 4 stories. So just kind of prepping you for what our draft zones are here. Next slide, please. And then here we see those zones mapped in our alternative 2 and alternative 3. And one thing that I didn't mention is in an environmental impact statement, you're analyzing your alternatives, and then you also have to analyze your no action alternative, analyze environmental conditions as if we were taking no action here. So alternative 1 is no action, alternative 2 and 3 are our action alternatives. So alternative 2 is the left map, AMBOM is shown here. And the idea there is that we focused changes to zoning along the corridor, closer in on the corridor, and that was focused more, yeah, like I said, along the corridor and at more of that mixed use low zone, and existing business retention was kind of a focus there. And then alternative 3 was our expansive alternative. We got more ambitious with that one and expanded further off of the corridor. And you see more residential high and mixed use high in that scenario. And both action alternatives are going to incorporate anti-displacement programs, transportation improvements, street tree requirements, and opportunities for city investment as well. Next slide, please. Now taking a look at the alternatives in AMBOM, again, that left map is alternative 2 with the focused intent. And then that right is alternative 3, the expansive intent. The focused, again, kind of limits zoning closer to existing commercial cores, and the expansive expands outwards with potential changes to zoning. And then you'll also note in alternative 3 that there is some residential medium around Hilltop Park as well. And then again, just to remind people that there are air quality and noise impacts in this neighborhood. And we heard about that in Dr. Johnson's presentation as well. So just something to consider. Next slide, please. And then I also want to talk about housing affordability. We'll go into more detail on this, I think, in future discussions. Just wanted to mention that this is something that we're considering and thinking about how we want to approach this, because there are different options on how you approach providing affordable housing with new zoning. So I wanted to give you kind of some of the strategies we're thinking about and some of the benefits and drawbacks of those. So the first one there is required inclusionary housing, which basically means that any new multifamily development would be required to provide a certain percentage of affordable housing. The benefit there is, of course, that you're able to establish and set the affordable units with any new development. The drawback there is that it often makes development not feasible. So if you're wanting to provide more housing, you can actually, this can have the unintended consequence of preventing new housing altogether. There's the multifamily tax exemption, which I brought up earlier. That provides a tax incentive to developers who are willing to provide affordable units in new development. So that tax incentive often makes it more feasible, more doable for developers to build those affordable units. The drawback there is that you can sometimes see reductions in tax revenue to the city, although we've been told that that's nominal. There are also development bonuses where you're offering development incentives like height increase or reduced parking requirements in exchange for a developer providing a certain percentage of affordable units. Again, you're providing a direct incentive for affordable units, and it often makes it more feasible for those affordable units to be developed. The drawback there is that the economics of that can be kind of tricky and hard to nail down. Like if you get the right fit for a development bonus, when your economics change or your market changes, you can start to see your bonuses not work as well anymore. So it's kind of a hard thing to nail down. So I just wanted to introduce that, and I would welcome feedback if the council has thoughts on strategies for housing affordability. Next slide, please. And then 2023 timeline, just to let you know where we're at and where we're headed. Our comment period for the draft plan and EIS just ended last Friday. In March, we're going to be meeting with our advisory group one last time. And then we will be introducing the sub-area plan to go through the legislative process with Planning Commission and then with you all. And then hopefully we'll have that adopted in June. And then a few months after that, we'll look at adopting the associated planned action and rezone. Next slide, please. So that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to address any questions the council has.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you for this great presentation, and all the work that's gone into this so far. I think I'm going to repeat a couple things that Susan is well aware of my fandom with some of these things, but I'll just say it again to ensure that it makes it into this final proposal. I would personally love to see a as broad as possible implementation of the MFTE. I think there is absolutely no reason to ensure that we have the most robust opportunity for developers to utilize this great tool to expand affordable housing in the city of Burien across all spectrums of it. So that's number one. Number two, I was just thinking more about sort of the character of these neighborhoods and the transit zones, and how AMBOM is much more of a corridor that connects White Center and West Seattle, and how Boulevard Park is much more connected to Des Moines Memorial, Military Road, and 99. And I'm wondering, as well as sort of its proximity to a lot of the areas where people do where businesses do manufacturing in Burien, and is there ways to incorporate insurances that semi trucks and large trucks and manufacturing mobility is not directly going through neighborhoods? Just the other day, I was driving through Boulevard Park and I saw semi trucks cruising through. Didn't seem like they needed to be going through Boulevard Park because we have 518 and 99 and 509 right there. So also, I guess also on AMBOM, you know, understanding where we have our semi trucks that are presumably going to NERA or some other places, stick to the transit corridors that they should be sticking to, and to reduce noise and reduce pollution in some of these neighborhoods. That's the second point. I'm personally in favor of the more expansive option across in both the area plans. I think that we as a city have one of the best tools to ensure that we are building high dense affordable housing, and that's zoning. And I think that in Burien, we've been pretty close to the front end of this in the region of making sure that we are attracting affordable housing and unique options and trying innovative things. And I think that this is proposing a really solid future for where we want to see smart growth and smart development. So I'm in favor of the third option. This is just a quick question I had. Has there been any communication with Rainier Golf Course about what they think about that sub area plan around Boulevard Park? Because they have a huge piece of property there, as you see on the map, and I'm just curious if there's been any communication with the golf course, and if they've come and offered thoughts.
Yeah, we've spoken with them about their future plans for retaining the golf course and mentioned this planning effort. They didn't have a lot to say one way or the other at the time that we spoke to them about kind of the direction we were headed with the plan.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Councilmember Mora, then Councilmember Sarah.
Thank you. I just wanted to remind everyone that high density apartments don't always equal affordable housing. Just because we have more apartments doesn't make it more affordable. One personal example for myself is my family could never afford to live in a different apartment or a different house in Burien. Just because we make under 50% AMI, it's not affordable for us to stay in Burien. We just got very lucky about where we're renting. So I would caution how we move forward with this, especially since there's a lot of families that live in these areas. One example for myself, we needed to find a temporary housing. We are a family of 7 now. And we found a 3-bedroom apartment that we could rent. The only downside was their cap was 6 people and they would not allow even a baby, a newborn. So that kind of sucked for us. So I would be interested to hear of the people or anyone, I guess, who would be potentially building these apartments, what their would be allowing for apartment sizes and the amount of people that would be allowed to live in there. But definitely be cautious of as we're going forward with this, and keep in mind the families that are currently in Burien are families. They're not 2 single, adults that I feel like would be more attracted to live in apartment complexes versus the houses that they're already currently living in. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I want to start by talking a little bit about Boulevard Park. And all things being equal, I would support option 3, but all things not being equal, Boulevard Park's a little bit of a hot mess with the airport going over it and the ultrafine particles that we just learned about and the noise, in addition to a lot of infrastructure issues with some of the things on the area that I was looking at on option 3 are still on septic systems. And I think if there's a plan that puts the cost of that on the developer, I'm very concerned that that's going to price people out of being able to live there. And I don't know who else it would be on, but if somebody's paying those additional costs, it's going to get passed on to the people living in that area. A lot of residents in Boulevard Park are renters because the people who originally owned the property moved somewhere else but couldn't sell the house and rent it. And so there's a lot of kind of people living in Boulevard Park where that is their price point. And I'm very concerned about that price point being lost in this. So those would be my thoughts on Boulevard Park. I think the language around the infrastructure and the environmental needs to be strong enough that those issues have to be addressed in order for growth to happen. And we obviously can't address it by making all the airplanes go somewhere else, but can the housing can it have the kind of air filtration that's needed? And as the proud owner of a HEPA filter, that's a lot of maintenance. So is there, if it's not maintained, there's health issues involved in not maintaining your HEPA filter. I want to make sure we think that neighborhood through, especially if we're seeing it as absorbing a large amount of Burien's population when there's known health issues that we're saying we want a large part of our population moving into.
Thank you.
Well, I appreciate when we looked at these 2-dimensional maps, a lot of the density is around the major thoroughfares. I think that makes sense. I'm just curious about what strategy, you had 3 strategies, what strategy would Connect be under? Is that just the MFTE, or was it a combination of dedicated and MFTE?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
So for the Connect project, if we were to put it in one of the strategies, which one would it be?
Like in one of the zoning categories?
Well, you had a housing affordability chart, and there was, in the middle was the multifamily tax exemption. Yeah.
Okay, so MFTE at an 80% area median income, that's the affordability level that Connect was
Okay.
developed under. Is that what you're asking?
not that I would necessarily build another connect in that, but I just wanted to see, what model were they following? And it seemed like, one thing to consider is that mixed income in these buildings, which I appreciate. The other pieces, well, a couple of pieces, I agree with Councilmember Sarah around, we do have the ability to be thoughtful, I think, of building requirements when we know certain residences may be exposed to things differently. So I think Boulevard Park is different from Ambom in many ways. I'd like to hear more about the equity lens because I feel like I saw it in the bicycle lane, but would like to hear more about how else does that manifest in a plan like this? There might be just more details I didn't hear or.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah.
So the idea behind the draft was really try to represent everything that we heard during our engagement. And the equity framework is going to come between the draft and the final, where we are going to represent kind of strategy prioritization and use the equity framework to kind of set those priorities and justify, answer those questions like, are we increasing access here? Are we creating cost burdens and displacement pressures here? To kind of use that as a way to prioritize.
All right, thank you. That's helpful. Any other questions? Oh, Councilmember Sarah.
Sorry, I have more questions. I have a few questions about the Ambom section as well. The first one has to do with sort of, so you're creating this, it sounds like walkable and mixed use corridor. I'm slightly concerned about walkability into that corridor from the adjacent neighborhoods. How easy is it to get to the walkable Ambom from different areas? And that's a concern I have for Boulevard Park as well, is that you have a lot of adjacent streets that don't have sidewalks, that maybe are narrow streets and don't have sidewalks, or it's unclear whether it's okay to park here, or you should be driving here, or you can walk here. And I think that those are questions that I'd like to feel that we knew an answer for as those main corridors were being built up. And the other question is more something, because I know people spoke earlier and they've been waiting to hear this conversation. I think one question people have is, what is a timeline after all of the community engagement, after the follow-up from this, and once it becomes, whatever version of it is adopted, what's the timeline of actually construction happening after that? Are there people waiting in line, or is it, okay, now it's been approved, eventually building will happen?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's the latter. So when we're talking about rezoning, we're talking about changing the regulations of what you can build and how large you can build it on your property. We haven't been talking with any specific development along that Ambom corridor for new development. There's no, guaranteed construction that's going to happen. We're not lining this up for like immediate growth. This is kind of laying the groundwork for as the city grows and changes. We won't see all of these properties that are rezoned develop in the next 20 years. So this is just the change of regulation that hasn't really changed since we adopted in 1993.
And is there a process whereby if my property has been rezoned, or the block over has been rezoned, where I find that out?
Yeah, so when we actually get to a spot where we know the formal boundaries of zoning, we're working with our communications team to make sure that people do know. Yeah, and then, there have been potential gaps in communication, and we want to make sure that when rezoning actually does occur, everyone kind of understands what's happening and can work together to weigh in and be part of the process.
Councilmember Mora.
Thank you. You actually reminded me of something. I think it's very important that we also talk to the people that would be the landlords of those properties or the owners of those properties to kind of see what issues or struggles they're having currently being landlords in Burien. I think it's very important that we take into consideration the people that are providing the housing currently in Burien.
Thank you, Councilmember Mora. Okay, well, thank you for that presentation and looking forward to an update in the next phase. So
Thank
I'm
you.
going to move us along. We're a little behind, about 40 minutes. So don't want to keep folks here unnecessarily. So the next item is advisory body applicant briefing. And I'll turn that over to our city clerk and deputy clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We'll just start with sharing that the application period for advisory bodies began on December 16th and closed this past Friday, January 27th. And applications were made available in English and Spanish. The vacancies were advertised on the city website, the B-Town blog, and the city's multiple social media accounts. As of January 27th at 5 p.m., there were 44 applicants to fill a total of 26 vacancies. Out of the 44 applicants, 12 are reapplying for their current positions. And in your agenda bill, you'll find 2 items of consideration before you. Due to the large numbers, number 1, due to the large numbers of vacancies, would council consider reappointing current members without conducting their interviews? As of right now, if council were to interview all applicants, interviews would span over the course of 5 special meetings at about 2 hours each. And then the second item of consideration is regarding the Burien Airport Committee. There were a total of 5 applicants to fill 6 vacancies. So city council may wish to consider decreasing the number of committee members, both community members and council members. And another item to consider is to stagger the term lengths. The agenda bill outlines the next steps and timeline, and we're happy to answer any questions that you might have at this time.
I have a question. Are there term limits on any of these seats?
Terms are 4 years each, and 2 terms total for each commissioner or member.
So if you were to consider someone who is reapplying, that would already be screened. You'd let us know
Yes.
who's eligible to, okay. Any other questions? Sarah.
First a comment, when I saw there were 25 vacancies, I was like, good luck. And I'm looking at it now and you have far exceeded. Good job. The other comment I had, or it was a question about the airport committee is, can you do standing vacancies where if a position isn't filled, you continue to post it, or is the effort to try and fill everything at the same time?
I believe the effort is to fill it at the same time. However, if the positions are not filled, I believe there is one person that would need to continue fulfilling their term. It's just difficult to know who that might be. Garmin, would you like to speak to that a bit?
Not really, because I don't know who that person is going to be. Generally, under the rules, people who are serving are expected to continue serving until their position has actually been filled. So unfortunately, someone who needs to finish under our rules would still be responsible for appearing until we find a person to replace them.
So anyone out there listening who knows anyone that wants to be on the airport commission, can they still apply, or is the window closed?
The applications are closed. However, because airport committee has not received sufficient applicants, I think we would make a consideration for that committee.
And I think this comes to the point about whether or not we need to continue having a total of 9, 3 council members as well as 6 members of the public? Or is this something that could be drawn down to perhaps 7 or 5? And then if that's the case, obviously you'd have enough members of the community that were interested to fill those slots. And that would require council action to make that change.
And one of the things that the Burien Airport Committee was intending to discuss was looking at they do have a charter bylaws, and we could say up to 9, so they don't have to meet, because there's 3 additional council members on top of the 6. But it is beneficial to have an odd number for voting, so that's something that we hope to resolve. So,
And I saw Councilor Moore's.
go ahead, Councilmember Moore.
So, we just heard a pretty chilling presentation about airport related issues. My thought is that perhaps that might galvanize some of our public members to take more interest. Obviously, we hear about these issues from time to time. It's not particularly new, but it may be new to some people. So if there's no objections, I would certainly appreciate being able to keep the application open for people to try and fill that one vacancy. And I would certainly hesitate to encourage our airport committee to minimize its size, because these issues are so impactful. And so the more people who can play a part in these conversations, I think the better. Whether they will or not, that's obviously up to them, but making it available to them to participate and weigh in if they do find themselves, feeling particularly strongly about the issue. I think it's just an important subject to have our community weighing in on. So, yeah, I mean, I think I would love to have at least another week for people to apply, or keep it open for people to apply for the airport committee, because this report was just a stark reminder of how much of a difference living next to an airport can really make. And there are so many voices that have not had significant weigh-in on these matters that we could really use playing some level of involvement in this conversation.
Thank you, Councilmember Moore. Any other questions? I have a question on the reappointments, because we have applicants and number of slots. So how many of the applicants are potential reappointments?
Potentially 12.
And do we know the distribution within the committees?
Yes, just one moment.
So for Arts Commission, there are 3. For Burien Airport Committee, there are 2. Oh, hang on one second. Hold on.
Oop, my mic is off.
This slide here, the application count.
Okay. Mhm.
So for Arts Commission, there are 3. Burien Airport Committee, there are 2 members reapplying. The EDP, there are 2. Human Services Commission, there are 3. Parks and Recreation Advisory Board, there is 1, and Planning Commission, there is 1 member reapplying.
Mhm. And so, I mean, I find myself having to think about this a little bit. So I see there's a timeline. So if this were to be discussed at a later meeting, how does that work with the interview timeline and appointment timeline? Is there any wiggle room?
I can pull up the timeline here for you. So the applications that closed on the 27th, our plan was to have council will select who they would like to interview at our next meeting on the 6th. And then over the next 5 meetings, we would have special meetings before for the interviews. And then they would be appointed at the business or at the regular meeting following the special meeting. So for most of these terms, they would need to be selected before the end of the term, which is March 31st. And a lot of the meetings the first meetings would start in early April. So that's kind of why we're pushing to have all of these selected before end of February, early March.
Councilmember Sarah.
I'm probably speaking for a lot of people and saying I have two completely different sets of thoughts about this. I know when I was on a commission, I was a much better commissioner in my second term. But on the other hand, I was taking up space that somebody else with new ideas and potentially that represented other parts of the community that hadn't been at the table could have been taking. So I'm really seeing both halves of this and would love to hear other people's thoughts.
Any other questions or thoughts? I mean, if no one's comfortable taking action, I think that's okay. I think for me, what's helpful, it's hard to just say, we should just go ahead and reappoint folks because there's so many new people. That's where I struggle. And what's helpful in the vetting process, if you will, is just reviewing who do we all have, how long have they been there, and staff giving us information about where the committee's going. And it's hard for me to make that decision without that information. So I just share that with the council. Councilmember Moore.
Can we postpone any further discussion or decision-making on whether or not we need to have the current existing commissioners interview until after we have a chance to read through all of the applicants? Because we do have new council members, right? So some of these commissioners may not have been interviewed by the existing council members. However, some of them may have, or they may be familiar with our commissioner, our council members may be familiar with them enough to recall interviewing them. I don't know. We're gonna have to go through a selection process of who we even interview, right? So it makes more sense to me for us to hold off until that point before trying to kind of cut things down even further.
Is it possible to have access to the applicant information just so that council members can take the time to review and be?
I'll send those to council by the end of the week this week. And then we plan to bring it up Monday at our February 6th meeting. So you'll have time to review beforehand as well.
Okay, can I see thumbs up on that? All right, sounds good. Councilmember Moore.
I just wanted to clarify what the situation is with our alternates and their positions, because obviously we have vacancies that do come up and the alternates have served a very dutiful purpose thus far. And so I want to make sure that we're recognizing them and utilizing them to their full capabilities and acknowledging them while we're going through these interview processes. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Moore. Okay, well, if there are no other comments, we can move to our next city council planning calendar. So our last item is the city council planning calendar. And
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I will keep it short. I know everyone's
Thank you.
eager to leave. You have your planning calendar in front of you in the packet. We'll share with you that the clerk's office and I are working to update the planning agenda that we have. So some of the things that are on there have already been done, completed, some are ongoing. So we're making sure that we make it as efficient a document to use as possible. On the planning calendar in your packets, you will not see reflected a few items like the police review or Eagle Landing yet, because we want to make sure that as we place it on the planning calendar, that it's a feasible thing for staff. So there's a lot of information to pull together. But otherwise, we are available if you need any help. Thank you.
Any questions, comments? I saw that Skip is on there and they've had a few presentations, probably 3, and a lot of them are operational nature. I just want to make sure that when they come to us to tell us how do we position Burien to get funding from Skip, because I know 2 other cities who benefited from that fund. And that is information I would like to hear, and so I just want to note that. Okay. One else? Okay, any other comments? Councilmember Mora?
I would like to add for a future agenda, if the council would like to hear it, and the talk about ESFs again.
Okay, can I see thumbs, ESFs? Okay, so you have 3.
ESFs, Enhanced Service Facilities.
Great. All right, so we have 3 thumbs, which is the requisite number. Any other topics? Okay, so we're at the end of our agenda, and so if there are no objections, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, staff.